Hello, this will be part 22 of a series on ancient legacy, and in this will actually be a few videos following up, and I'll be looking at especially the medieval period and using Beauvais Cathedral here as a basis. And so we have the great cathedrals, so for instance, Beauvais, also Notre Dame as well, Chartres, Amiens, across Europe especially. We had like a blossoming of knowledge before the Enlightenment. So this is even before the Medicis brought the Corpus Hermetica into Europe. We see that there's this evidence of this very special type of architecture there. Unlike the previous two Beauvais cathedrals, they had Romanesque architecture, which were rounded arches, very thick walls, very small windows to support the weight. But then around about the year 1100, there was an explosion of very beautiful architecture, and Beauvais Cathedral being one example, and Notre Dame in Paris being another one. Just this really spectacular type of architecture, the great cathedrals as they're called. And well, they're very special because it's so again, this is before Corpus Hermetica was introduced, and also um, around about the time of the Crusades and Knights Templar, who brought this, even amongst the legends, even amongst the history, they brought back this knowledge from the Holy Land, and it began like a re-blossoming of knowledge. But it's also very important in regards to, for instance, Masonic history. So the official Masonic lodges, as we know now, are like often called free and accepted Masons. But prior to that, a Mason was literally either a brick mason or a stone mason or a tiler, and was directly connected to the craft of construction. So we see some old stained glass where we have the workers carrying on. That's a more modern example, but the craft guilds were like an early trade union where were literally like you become an apprentice to a master, and it was the basis, the beginnings of, let's call them, secret societies. But a better term for that is mutual aid or fraternal societies, because once you're a member, there was a whole system of looking out for one another and also protecting the craft. And so one example is the like barber or barber surgeon. This the red stripe you might be familiar with. That's got to do with bloodletting, because barber surgeons had knives and blades, and they were surgeons as much as what they were barbers as well. And these are just some examples of okay, but the craft guilds, especially the masons and the carpenters, even you still see like the traveling German carpenters are a legacy of these older societies, where not only did they look after one another, they were also very much into protecting the quality of their secrets. And so you had to do your work to a very high quality, unlike the mentality which sort of goes around now. But also their symbols of it. So the square and the compass go back to this era of the masons, stonemasons, even like, for instance, alchemists who made the stained glass in these types of buildings, the master carpenters, the metallurgists, the skill, even mortar was mixing the mortar was a very special skill. And we just sort of see examples. Again, this ancient lifting technology, still being used back in the time. And again, there's so much records of this, but that's a separate sort of one of the bugbears I have in regards to a lot of these areas. Again, we see the craft guild, so working with the furnace, so metallurgy, glass making, steel work, stone work. Here's Salzburg, and you even see like amongst the more modern ads, we still see a lot of these old symbols. So, for instance, the like the old pawn shop logo was free hanging balls. That prior to people being very literate, we used symbolism more, and shops would advertise what their purpose was with the red and white stripe or with free hanging balls, that type of thing. Craft guilds or the trade, still exist, especially in London. It's a special part. Compass and square. So this is where we see the columns. Stonemason, mason, the stone. All these are part of this legacy, which goes back, again, more examples. Now, these are, of course, covered in some other videos. These are all the tools that still exist and were also used in the depictions going back to ancient Egypt. Not lost high technology at all. It was a continual trade that's been passed on, where we still see, for instance, cornerstones. There's still this ancient ceremony connected with these ancient tools, connected with stonework. It's just there's so much history regards to that, and well, that's okay. There's an example of free balls, money lent or pawnbrokers, and so these are like some of the legacies of these old craft guilds. The optics, and again the square and compass and this type of thing, the sun and the moon, these ancient symbols. Uh, Again, just yeah, let's not go into that. And so we just this again carries on through to this day. But back to so Notre Dame and Beauvais Cathedral, because again this ancient legacy of measures and numerical symbolism, which is built into the most ancient of temples, including Stonehenge, Great Pyramid, all these stone circles, or again all these old temples going back to the beginning of what's considered the beginnings of civilization. So okay, Beauvais Cathedral, the Masons built this. Now at that time, various regions were competing to build a cathedral to make their town, their city, more important. This was a very it was yeah, a thing about glory and it's making yourself stand out. And so they were actually in competition. There were not enough skilled masons, glass makers, brick tilers, all the skills. So it's not just about stone. There's dozens of very specialized skills that were involved in making something like this, and the various bishops and kings and mayors were all in competition to attract these skilled tradesmen to their city to build the cathedral. And because they had leverage, the Masons, they were able to negotiate and have special privileges, not to have to go to pay church tax and all these sorts of things. So that's like this is where where the origins of modern masonry comes from, and also which would later to lead to people such as George Washington, and the destruction of the divine rights of popes and kings, was because we had these skilled tradesmen who were able to negotiate their working conditions, their living conditions, and all this type of thing. Very important part, never if ever discussed amongst the usual suspects who talk about spooky stuff, so to speak. But Beauvais, so what we have is the up to the vault 144 medieval royal feet. This medieval, I single this out because I'll explain why I'm calling it medieval royal feet, just to separate it from other royal feet, for instance Babylonian or the royal cubit in ancient Egypt. Now all cathedrals have this particular number, very, very important number, and as I move through, not in this set, but I'll explain the importance of this number. But one of the reasons was because, for instance, it connects to New Jerusalem, so the area. So whether it's new, you could translate this directly onto the ancient Epic of Gilgamesh and the oldest recorded written flood story, because it's 120 by 120 by 120 cubits rather than 12,000 furlongs. So the same numerical symbolism is built in. But in New Jerusalem, they even describe the walls being 144 cubits. When these cathedrals were open, the bishop would even read from these particular parts of the Bible with this symbolism in there. Many other aspects in regards to 144, for instance, 12 tribes of Israel with 12,000 members each, 144,000, just repeated so often. But this is an essential element in all cathedral design, and done some earlier videos, but as an example, so this is a relatively very new basilica. Basilicas are like a special type of cathedral. The nave height is 144 feet. Going back to the 12th century, 144 feet spire. Even might notice the floor pattern there. This is in England. Now you'll see it, First Christian Church in Columbus, Ohio, 144 feet long. Holy Trinity Church in Hull, 144 feet long nave. And you must remember that the English foot as it's described in most history, they're like at least 1500 to 2000 years off the actual date of this, because it's embedded in ancient architecture. There's even conversion stones which contain the so-called modern English foot going back to no less than 2500 years. And expanding it back, you can see evidence of it in so many places across these ancient sites, across time, across the world, across cultures. Amiens Cathedral, 144 Roman feet high. So it's the symbolism, whether it's in the number of windows or the elements within the building, will always repeat. This is just an essential going back to the beginning of having 144. But of course, this is not a Christian number because it actually can go back to the Yugas. You'll find that again in the Epic of Gilgamesh. You'll see the same symbolism repeated across time, across cultures, across the world. But the point here is that Notre Dame Paris, and Stefan van Leffringe pointed this out, the medieval royal foot. So New Jerusalem and Solomon's Temple are essential symbolic elements to this. Now, I did a recent video on Ain Dara Temple, how that was a prototype, and again that the elements in Solomon's Temple actually go back earlier, and what was in Ain Dara can even be found in earlier sites, including Karnak, ancient Egypt, the British Isles, Japan, India, these other places. Very, very old usage, same principles just repeated constantly. But the medieval royal foot, so 3.28 feet equals 30 medieval royal feet, which is interesting because 3.280 feet equals 1 meter. And these again are important numbers, but the Solomon's Temple, for instance, the descriptions at the different levels are at 30, then at 60 cubits. But here we see that 30 and 60 royal feet. So these cathedrals embody New Jerusalem and Solomon's Temple openly. Again, this is, they even when they were talking about it, they read from the book, and we'll see that the symbolism of New Jerusalem, Solomon's Temple, is a very important theme to the modern day in regards to Freemasonic symbols, for instance, being one example. So again, the medieval royal foot, there's just some info on the conversions and stuff, because this will be an important theme. So 144 feet, that's 157.44 if you're here in Australia or in Sydney. That's the length also, so it's the length of Beauvais Cathedral. That's also the, that's the height. The length of St Andrew's Cathedral here in Sydney is 157.44 feet. Coincidentally, again, just it's repeated. It's in the trained, skilled architects know these things. They put the same symbols, but also metrological or measure symbols in these very, very important numbers. And so this will be the basis for the next few episodes. I'm going to break them into less than 15-minute videos just to make it much easier for myself. But especially 27.333 ionic fathom, this number, if you've seen the earlier episodes of this, how it's embedded in all these ancient structures, again, cross time, cross cultures, across the world. And ionic being an important theme because, okay, you also notice that when we convert it to SI, we have so 109.333 ionic cubits. But one medieval royal foot also converts to 109.333 English feet is one medieval royal foot. That's important because of the Salamis stone. Again, keep referring back to this and other ancient elements that embody these older systems of measurement. These are the fundamentals of construction of these temples, and also of embedding the numerical symbolism into these structures. And the Ionic foot, so this is a 2,000-year-old stone, which has the modern English foot like literally in there. This connects to the Parthenon, but also the Ionic foot, which will be a theme. And of course the Parthenon, so the columns 48 English feet high, which is 45 Doric, 50 Ionic. We see a harmony between multiple sets of measures, which will also present us with number. So for instance, 144 is a conversion point in the Parthenon as well, and again so many others. And Ionic is also a system of music as well as measurement, also an architectural mode. And again, okay, so I'll end this episode now, and I'll follow up because there's a lot of information, a lot of connections to draw from this. Hope you enjoyed. Stay tuned.